So again, my name is Philip Martin, and I'm the co-owner of Philip Martin Gallery here in Los Angeles. And I'm co-owner with Portia Hine, who I hope you've had a chance to meet either here at the gallery or at the fairs. And I hope that if you have any questions or see something you want to talk to me more about, just feel free to send an email. I'm absolutely delighted to talk to Katy Cowan today. We have put together, or she has put together, an amazing body of new works. And it's really a thrill to have a chance to talk to Katy about her practice and what she's doing. And it's always fun to start there with a new body work. And you can see right here, these are graphite drawings. This is a slightly older piece, so we're just going to look at this for a second, and we'll move into the new works. So how are you doing today, Katy?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk about this whole series of drawings slash paintings that I've been making the last couple months with everybody.
Yeah, so this whole project started with you finding a new kind of paper in Berlin. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it really started because we moved to Berlin to figure out how to start making work here. But alongside that, obviously came the introduction of new materials and surfaces to work with. So when we got here about a year and a half ago, I discovered this incredible um, thick textured paper to work with. As you can see, it has a lot of grit to it. You can kind of see that in the graphite marks and the way the paint grabs the surface. But I was attracted to this paper um, because I obviously love texture as someone who works with like metal and concrete and wax and all those great materials. But this paper seem to also replicate the surfaces of the statues that I've been drawn to while I've been living here so far.
So what's it like to, tell us what we're looking at here. This is one of the new pieces in your show. Tell us what we're looking at and a little bit about how this piece came together.
Of course, yeah. So we're looking at a drawing or painting, however you want to categorize it, on paper. They're a bit tricky. So material-wise, there's a bunch of spray paint, there's oil paint, and then there's graphite. And these images that I'm kind of building start as very light application of lots and lots of spray paint. So very loose, a lot of compiling of line that are loosely based off figures that I find in the parks that like populate the city. So there's lots of these stone figures in the parks, obviously in the museums, on the streets that you're just kind of passing by every day. And these figures are really interesting to me, not only because of their texture, although I do love their texture. They're really pocky and kind of war-torn figures.
Slash
But
acid raining.
yeah, slash acid rain, slash moss building up, slash tons and tons of graffiti compiling over them.
Right.
But they're really interesting because they really waver between abstraction and representation. Like they're very blocky. Sometimes parts of them are falling off. Sometimes, like I kind of jokingly said, they're just totally covered in graffiti. So these images like kind of pop out or recede or camouflage into the city or the parks that they live in. So I've been drawn to the figure in that context.
So is that
So
sort of, when I'm thinking about, well, I didn't mean, don't let me interrupt you. Like, go ahead and I'll
okay.
save my question until later.
It's okay. I was just gonna say, and so those figures form the base of these drawings, loosely with the spray paint, and then I start compiling all this oil paint and graphite to kind of build out these figures or let these figures kind of dissipate or kind of drift through the compositions. So also showing a lot of movement in the pieces themselves, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, there's an incredible amount of movement. And I think that's what I was going to say is that when I don't have a lot of experience in Berlin, but when you talk about the sculptures, what it of course reminds me of is the history of kind of a Soviet era public modernism that can have a kind of cubist, so to speak, feel to it with a lot of blocky. And of course, when I think about cubism, I think about a pictorial definition of space if we're in painting, or I think about, in a sculptural context, you have a different thing. But of course, you also often are thinking about faceting and the sense of planes. And I think in your work, your sculptural work, you're responding to and creating a sculptural surface that you then are painting on. There's a depiction of physical space, or there's the coming together of pictorial space, so to speak, in your sculptural pieces. I should have one up, but I'm afraid that I don't. That is, driven by color and line and a lot of stuff. These works are also doing that, of course, but you're also are more overtly addressing pictorial space in the way it would be more typically created in a painting. Though, of course, as you mentioned, the texture of the paper also leads to a lot of chance-driven places to start compositions. And then, of course, as we talk about the figure, we can also see the figures are there. So that's I don't know if you have a response to those.
No,
Various
no,
comments.
it's good to hear because I hadn't heard you say it in this way before, but it's true because the just thinking about how I've addressed planes physically with sculptures and how that translates to the pages here, but why I might be drawn to these sort of figures that I see around Berlin. Um, it's just a great connection that I hadn't heard you say, and I hadn't like made it. So, it's like, why are you drawn to something? I'm not quite sure. And then all these other voices come in, and it's like, yeah, that obviously that makes sense.
Right.
Because it's a very particular type of figure that you see here, right?
Yeah.
Or the way they're rendered here.
Yeah.
And so how that can translate on just like a flat page, they're very sculptural, yeah.
Yeah. Are you sort of looking and thinking, okay, I'm going to draw a figure a certain way, or is the figure more suggested to you through the process in making these works?
Through the process, totally. So like the figure really just builds up through all these spray paint marks. That's like the first layer. When I was first starting these, I felt like they were more kind of like direct and like, oh, I do these sketches and then I'm going to lay it out on the page. Where now, since I've gotten more used to the material and used to the subject matter of like working with figure, now it's more a matter of just getting all the paper out and all the, there's like 50 different spray paint can colors to choose from, and just slowly and very lightly letting these forms sort of like emerge out of the page without looking at any of my sketches or anything.
So are you starting with a kind of swirl of lines, for lack of a better description?
Yeah, I mean, like on this one, I think you can kind of see probably the first couple lines I made were like that big arch of that kind of lilac purple that's like the arch of a back and the suggestion of a head. It's kind of like like a figure kind of bending over this way. So I think those were some of the first lines, and then just letting all those other lines kind of build the body as it might happen.
And what about sort of, the tool usage, the dragging of the brush or the direct applications?
Yeah, it's interesting because they're not very planned, I guess. It's the same sort of call and response I feel like I had with the metalworks,
Right.
where I just, or any painter does, they just stare at this thing for a long time and suddenly it's like, okay, I know exactly what to do there.
Yeah.
But this paper and the way I layer it, so it starts with all the spray paint, and the spray paint has a weird effect on the paper in that it's hard to make like a clean paint mark, because once you put the brush on there, it kind of like junks up the brush and stops it, so it becomes more of a dry brush technique.
And is that because of the tooth of the paper itself?
It's a tooth, and it's just like some of the spray paint kind of coming off with the hardness of the brush.
Okay, sure.
So like if this piece is a great example, if you look kind of in the middle right, there's that big white oil paint, thicker line. And it started off with tons and tons of oil paint, but it just kind of like got junked up with the it just kind of crams up, so it can't make these lines you might be able to make on a canvas. So there's a little bit of resistance from the material um, that I'm not sure how it will actually come out on the paper.
And what about some of the more the dot making patterns? And because this is something that you also do in your wall mounted sculptural works.
Hmm. Do you mean like the repetition of like circles, or actually like the staccatoing?
This more, yeah, this more staccato-y marks, or whatever you want to talk about, obviously.
Yeah. So that kind of staccatoing effect, or like pointillist effect, it's not staccatoing effect. It makes sense. Sorry. um, that actually happens as a result of the material as well, like because you can only make like certain lines on the spray paint.
Mhm.
So that sort of happened because of the surface. But
Mhm.
I also really love it because it replicates the texture of the stone sculptures that I'm looking at.
Mhm.
But then also this repetition of like circular sun-like or moon-like forms that's coming up in these drawings. It's come up in past sculptures. Also just referencing like the compilation of time and working on these, like days and days of observation and
Uh-huh.
painting. So that's why that form keeps emerging or keeps staying, I
So
guess.
what do you mean by that? I mean, when you say, could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. Um, I guess in all my work, I'm trying to combine or maybe catalog a bunch of experiences, not just like kind of seize one moment or depict one instance of the figure or one instance of the landscape, but
Mhm.
rather what does it mean to compile many days or many observations of the same thing,
Mhm.
or many times of the day, let's say. And one way that I've tried to depict that is to also include um, the weather patterns or the changes of light that occur
Mhm.
over the change of the day, over the compilation of days. And so like it kind of it's not easy, but like something that is just something I mean, I've always seen are all these like sunsets and moonrises, so that that form comes up again and again
Mhm.
in the drawings and the paintings and the sculptures to
Mhm.
hopefully also signify this combination of all that activity.
Does it also play into your titles?
Yeah, definitely.
You want to talk a little
Definitely.
bit more about the titles for the different pieces?
Yeah, the
Because
titles
your
for
titling
these.
system is very unique, and we should probably, we should probably be talking more about that.
Yeah, the titles for these pieces, which I don't have them all memorized offhand, but I know how
That
I
makes me
title
feel a lot better.
them. Like, oh crap. Um, but these ones all were kind of referring to some sort of movement that was taking place, so they all end with drift in the titles, because
Mhm.
I was really interested in having these images kind of drift through the pages, or figures drift through the pages, or the movement of drifting happening in these pieces, a lot of
Mhm.
movement again. And then they all have some sort of signification of what either the figures or the landscape is doing. Sorry, I'm trying to remember what the title for these this particular piece is now.
Well,
But
the
I
show
know,
title is Figure Through Contour Drift, and
yes.
it's in
So,
block caps, and it's a
mhm.
run-on compaction of words. So, what is that about?
Yeah, so that one obviously it begins with, figures. So there's these figures, and then through, which is that these figures are kind of moving through these pieces. They're
Mhm.
all kind of defined by these contours, and then drift, so that action of them uh, drifting through. Uh, so then, sorry. Also, how can contour through drift? It's like how can the words all compile together
Mhm.
in like sort of shorter sentences, but then also be individuated. So I wanted it to be this kind of poetic title that kind of hits you in the face, all capital, so that you have to kind of break it apart and understand what's happening, but
Right.
then also be able to like break it apart as individual words.
Right. In a kind of parallel process to viewing the works themselves.
Yeah, yeah, it's like how can you make your titles sync up with what you're thinking about in the studio? It's always such a difficult task.
And, you know, we also, of course, had a recent conversation just briefly about someone like Picabia or some of the other kind, you know, that feeling of space. Do you think some new avenues have been opened up for you in these pieces?
I think so. I've been working towards working on canvas again, so actually making like paintings again.
Mhm.
And the drawings in the last year, and in particular, I think this set of drawings has made me um, kind of more comfortable with getting into the idea of just like, constructing a space again.
Mhm.
Um, Sculpture, your space is kind of, you're creating the space, physically, and then asking viewers to enter the space. But to now have a 2D plane to work with the space, and how do you go about doing that? How do you make it physical? How can you make it kind of fluctuating? But
Mhm.
how can you make it sculptural has been something I've really been trying to figure out in the studio. So
Mhm.
it's been a great challenge and learning process for me to see it come through in these drawings and then figure out how I'm going to bring it in onto the canvas.
So what do you think? What are you thinking there?
Well, I think it's one, about the process, which I think I've kind of nailed down with these drawings in terms of like it's not it doesn't have to be confined by the page or the
Mhm.
canvas. It can
Mhm.
still um, like the images, or these figures, as we're talking about the title, kind of drift through.
Yeah.
How can I do that also on like a canvas?
Yeah.
Um, it doesn't have to be confined, or I think I was worried about them feeling confined
Yeah.
just because I haven't painted for so long.
Mhm.
Um,
Confined
but
by the edge of the picture plane itself.
yeah, yeah, how can they move through and like also go on to the next one or something like that? My sculptures have always been like very conversive with each other.
Mhm.
But I how can I create an image sculpturally on a page or a canvas? That is like the main question that I'm trying to figure out.
Mhm. But when you talk about in sculpture, you know, you're asking someone to share space with something.
Hmm.
Want to talk about that just a little bit more? And of course, a lot of your pieces are wall mounted.
Yeah, they are well
I mean, you
mounted.
have a
It's
history
true.
of making all kinds of sculpture, but more recently.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think, what I was really drawn to with sculpture is its ability to really engage someone physically, right?
Mhm.
You can't get away from its physical presence. It's just a different relationship than paper or canvas or linen. Um, you can't, um, there's a different, I think, investigative quality that happens with sculptures that I got really
Mhm.
excited about. And
Mhm.
when I started working with metal, I think that's when it really started to engage people's viewing experience and get them to really question what they were looking at or what I was trying to get them to see in those sculptures. Um, Obviously, if a lot of pieces are wall mounted, it's, I'm thinking more about like engaging someone physically in the round when I'm thinking about the freestanding pieces.
Mhm.
But those wall mounted pieces, I think because of their materiality, that they just had they had a really interesting kind of, obviously there's a physical weight to them, but
Mhm.
that I could kind of alleviate that physical weight and bring it into something that seemed very like light and fleeting yet captured at the same time.
Mhm.
That's what I'm trying to that's what I've always been trying to do with the sculptures, but how can I then bring that onto the page or the canvas?
This is a beautiful piece. I mean, there's of course a reference to a figure, but it also is so easily read to me as a kind of landscape, something like an early Matisse kind of in its
Oh, thank
feeling.
you. Thank you.
What, a,
Yeah, yeah.
what about landscape in your work?
Well, it's something I am just personally really drawn to,
Mhm.
and I find myself spending a lot of time in. But all the kind of details and fluctuations that can happen when you're in it and observing it and spending time with it every day. Um, I love that it's very precise, but also something very broad, right? So how can that be translated into some sort of pictorial experience? That's something I'm always trying to get at as well. Um, in this particular piece, I know I really love this piece too. I'm glad you
It's
like it.
gorgeous.
It's nice to hear. This was actually kind of inspired from we live right by a big bridge that overlooks like a small lake pond thing in this park,
Mhm.
where you just get all the reflections of there's some statues that are situated on the bridge, but also the people that hang out there and all these huge willow trees and whatnot. So there's this really great convergence of visual information, that if you just spend time staring at it, you see it all kind of move through the
Mhm.
reflection on the water there. So I was trying to figure out how to get that. How can I how can I create something that feels like that or resembles that a little bit in
Well,
this
it's
piece?
interesting too, because of course, you were, while have a background here in Southern California, you were most recently in Northern California. And of course, a lot of the works were seascapes and that kind of encounter. And of course, one of the things here in Southern California, to me, being that we're both originally from the Midwest, is the light is very different. It's generally speaking, to me, it's much more washed out.
Hmm.
And also the feeling of light and shadow is so strong here because the light is so strong.
Yes, definitely.
Um, and so it's interesting because it means that to me the landscape's really changing really drastically, really fast because it changes with the movement of the sun. But you
Yes.
mentioned that in Berlin today, not only is it the day after the summer solstice, so it's light until like 11 o'clock, but you mentioned it was
Yeah.
raining all day.
Yeah.
So, that kind of maybe something more overcast, does that change the kind of light that you're seeing? I can see that kind of blue, what I always think of as this kind of bluer, I don't know,
Yeah.
German light behind you.
Yeah. No, that it's funny because the light here, I mean, in the summer, it's nice that it rained today. It hasn't rained for like a month. But I think something that is really different about here than Northern California or Southern California is that, it's really dark and gray here for a
Mhm.
while in the
Mhm.
winter.
Yeah,
Um, don't forget that.
yeah,
It's really nice right
yeah,
now, but in the
yeah.
winter it's
Well, and
pretty
you also
dark.
have this kind of public engagement in parks. I mean, of course, Californians love to be outside, but
Yeah.
way in which Germans seem to enjoy their summer and coming out into parks and social engagement in public space,
Oh yeah,
especially somewhere like
definitely.
Berlin is really fun.
Oh yeah, it's definitely there's a huge park culture. I mean, I'm part of it. So
Yeah.
it's like, what should we do? Let's go outside in the park. But because of the light, for the other times of the year, uh, the color, like there's so much more neon in these pieces. And that's a huge part because there is so much like graffiti on these stone figures. So it's like all of a sudden I'm trying to figure out how to bring neon into the color palette
Right.
and use that as a lighting source as well, which has been an interesting challenge. Much different than the color palette of Northern California, let's say.
Yeah. Well, we're approaching the end here. It's been a delight talking to you. Is there anything that we haven't talked about or any thoughts?
With these pieces,
Yeah.
I don't think so. It's fun to like see them all together with you and hear your thoughts on them as well.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining me today. And thank you everyone for coming out. If you have any questions or thoughts about anything, feel free to be in touch. I hope you have a great summer. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy your
Yeah.
park.
Yeah. Schönes Wochenende.
I'll talk to you later.
Okay.